Hello and welcome. Welcome to today's F.SEI Live program. My name is Jennifer Goupil. I'm with F.SEI, and I wanted to thank you for joining us today. We at F.SEI started to do these live sessions during COVID to try to provide a little more engagement and connection with our audience. Sorry about that. So I was saying, we started to do these programs so that we could engage with our broader community during COVID. We were all feeling a little disconnected from you all, and we really wanted to reach out, bring our experts to the forefront and have discussions on interesting and varied topics. So today, our topic is on code development. My name is Jennifer Goupil, as I stated. I manage the standards development program here at F.SEI. And today I have two esteemed colleagues of mine with us today to talk about codes and standards development. With me today, Cherylyn Henry. She is a structural engineer at Zapata in North Carolina. And I have Susan Dowty, government relations manager at the ICC in the California office. So with that, I wanted to just give a brief background for everyone joining today on our history, kind of our experience, and what we have done in our career so far in terms of code development. So I would share with you that I started at M.ASCE, F.SEI in particular, about 10 years ago, believe it or not. And so I started with the development of the F.SEI standards program, and in particular managing some of our biggest standards, ASCE 7, ASCE 41, ASCE 24, these documents. It is a long process, and we will talk about that today and how it all works out. But since then, I have met several very experienced and savvy code developers. And I also was thrilled to bring more people into the fold and welcome others into the process. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too, and how we can continue to add more and more people into this process. So with that, I was going to turn it over to my guests. I would like for them to explain to you where they have been in their careers and what has brought them here today. So Susan, why don't you go ahead and start?
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you for the opportunity to join this live event. I think this is just a fantastic venue for us to connect and to share our experiences and to, yes, invite others to join us in the fun world of code development. I've been involved with code development for most of my career, which spans over 35 years. I did start out as a code user with the County of San Diego as a plan reviewer. And there must be something about rules and regs that I like, because I stuck with it throughout my career. I went to the International Conference of Building Officials next. That is a predecessor to the I-codes with the uniform codes. And I did plan review there for 6 years, followed up with code development. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. And after being there for 13 years, I moved on to S.K. Ghosh Associates, a seismic and building code consulting firm. Stayed there for 16 years and enjoyed working with the users of the code, as well as being involved in the development of the building code. You know, I think I have a passion for making the code understandable and easy to use. During that time, I did work on ASCE 7 and reformatting it just for that purpose, for user friendliness. And there's been a number of committees that I've been involved with along the way, both with ASCE and B.SSC, the Building Seismic Safety Council. And so then in 2015, I moved on to ICC, where I work with members of the organization. ICC is the International Code Council, publisher of the Building Code. And I really enjoy working with the members, getting them connected with all of the products and services that ICC offers, as well as staying on top of the code development and code changes. So it's been a fun career, and I look forward to sharing some of my experiences and lessons learned today. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. Cherylyn, tell us about your experience.
All right, thanks so much, Jennifer. And I'd like to echo Jennifer's and Susan's comments about this being a great platform to reach out, especially to younger members, young professionals who maybe don't have much experience in the code development world. So I'm really excited to get to share our experiences with you today. As Jennifer said, I am a structural engineer with Zapata in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I went to grad school in Illinois, and after grad school, I moved on to Arizona, where I started my career. And there I was involved with YMF of A.SCE. It was a very strong program in Phoenix, and in participating there, I was able to attend one of the national conferences, and through that conference, actually met a bunch of SEI folks, and I wasn't really familiar all that much with SEI at that point, and so it was really great to get to know those people. I attended my first SEI conference in 2011, and I actually met Jennifer at that conference, and it turned out at that time, a lot of the larger standards like 7 were looking to get younger members more involved because, as some of them like to put it, everybody in the room has gray hair. So they're looking to get fresh blood and more people involved. So I was just in the right place at the right time. And so I worked with the A.SCE 7 members and said I would be really interested in being on the Winlet subcommittee. And so I became secretary of the 716 cycle, and I now serve as vice chair of the 722 cycle. And so it's been really fascinating being involved in the code and standard development side and getting to see how things work, and just getting to meet new people, learning how the provisions go, and essentially all of the history behind it too, because that's something that I feel like a lot of, especially younger folks, don't necessarily get to learn that knowledge. So that's one of the great things about being involved, is you get to pick up on those things. And then after moving to North Carolina, just maintaining involvement and working with the local SEI chapter here. So it's been great.
Thank you both. I wanted you guys to be able to give your story kind of to the audience so they could understand. It was much better when you give it than when I try to introduce you. Thank you for doing that. I think we should just go ahead and dive right in, because kind of the big question that I would like to answer overall, so we can kind of lead ourselves to the nitty gritty in a conversation, might be a discussion around really how do the standards get developed? How does the code get developed? What is the actual process? Because it feels like a black box to a lot of people I know. When we're in the thick of it, of course, we understand all of it, but for a lot of folks, and hopefully a lot of folks that are tuned in right now can learn a lot about the process from us. Let's start with the big kind of picture of how does the standard actually get developed? Cherylyn, you also serve on the A.SCE Codes and Standards Committee, so you see a lot of how this process actually works with A.SCE. And then we'll start with Cherylyn, and then Susan, I want you to pick up on the ICC process and the hearings. So Cherylyn, share with us.
So on the A.SCE 7 side, you start out with a new cycle. You've got the main committee, and then each chapter or each hazard has its own working group. And with that, you go through, you work through the standard, you develop proposals based on change recommendations from the committee members, but also from the public and other folks. And it's a several years long process. You have to develop the proposals within your subcommittee, and then those proposals they work their way through the main committee, and it's a very tedious process. You have to have all of the comments responded to. So it's not as simple as just, well, I think, you know, maybe KZT needs to change in the WIN chapters. It's not as simple as that. You have to have reasoning behind it. You have to provide examples and how this will impact the industry. Then you have to go through the challenge of having all of your colleagues discuss it as well. And then once you have worked through that as a subcommittee, then it goes on to the main committee. And then the main committee gets to also take a look at this proposal and deem whether or not this should be incorporated into the next cycle, the next edition of the standard. And so once that's all the way through, then the document goes to public comment. And some of you may know that ASCE 722 just closed for public comments. So we're in the throes of addressing all of those comments, and we did receive a lot of great ones. So thanks to whoever participated in that. And then after that, it goes on to the ICC hearings. And so that's a whole nother level on the code side. And I'm sure Susan and Jennifer will touch on this in a little bit, but a lot of the younger folks that I work with, they use codes and standards interchangeably, and they're really not. So on the standard side, ASCE 7 is a standard. It is not a code, and it has to be adopted by the IBC before it can actually be implemented. And then it goes a step forward, and each state has to actually adopt the IBC. And then, as you probably know, each state has its own provisions that they incorporate as well. And then each state is different. So there's a whole layer and different levels of acceptance before ASCE 7 hits your desk and you're actually legally allowed to use it. So I'll turn it over to Susan to maybe expand a little bit more on the legal side.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cherylyn. That was a great overview of the development of standards. The I codes, so now I'm using the word codes, references hundreds of standards. And really a code is the regulatory framework that tells you what's required, and then how you comply with what's required is often found in the referenced standard. So the standard development process is different than the code development process. And ICC, on our website, we've outlined it very clearly about how we develop codes versus how we develop standards. And our ANSI approved standards consensus process is very similar to ASCE's process for the development of ASCE 7. And I just wanted to point out that you'll see in the I codes, ICC standards referenced as well. Last time I took a look, we had more than 15 ICC standards. So just wanted to add that to the discussion. And with respect to the code development process, I don't think it's quite as tedious because you don't get quite as into the weeds. You don't have that opportunity that you have through the standards development process. And the I codes development process, I'm trying to be very deliberate when I say code versus standards. So the International Building Code, the International Residential Code, the International Existing Building Code, the International Property Maintenance Code, the International Performance Code. These are, I think I just named 5 codes that may be of interest to this audience. We have 14 codes that follow our code development process. And so those 14 codes are separated into 2 groups because it makes it more manageable. And they're published every 3 years. So I want to make sure that everyone knows that, it's very routine, it's very dependable. Every 3 years, there's going to be a new code. So the most recent edition is the 2021 code. The next editions will be the 2024 codes. So during that 3-year period, we have 2 cycles because, like I said, we divide those 14 codes into 2 groups, Group A and Group B. And so this year in 2021, we're addressing the Group A codes, and there's three main stages. One is you have to submit the code changes. So that takes place in January with a January deadline. And then we have committees that review all the code changes and vote on approval, disapproval, or approval as modified. And that takes place in the spring, every 3 years for that particular code. And then in the fall, we have the public comment hearings. So let's say you didn't like the way that the committee voted on a code change. You can submit a public comment, and that's heard in the fall. And the final vote on the code changes is left to our governmental members who have no vested interest in these code changes. So it's a governmental consensus process, very open, very transparent. And it happens every 3 years. Now, for the structural related provisions, they, for the most part, fall in Group B. So the timing of this live event is perfect because the Group B codes, the structural provisions in the International Building Code, the International Existing Building Code, the building provisions in the International Residential Code, will all be heard in 2022 with those same 3 steps of the code change deadline, the committee hearings, and then the public comment hearings, followed up towards the end of the year with the governmental members voting on the final say of those code changes. I've simplified it a little bit. We've got all of the resources, all of the rules for these 2 development processes, the code development process and the standard development process, posted on the ICC website. So that was like a very quick overview of the code development process. And Jennifer, if I confused anyone, or Cherylyn, if you have any questions, you just let me know. I tried to break it down best I could.
Right, that was great, Susan. Thank you, Cherylyn. Thank you both. I know we threw a lot of information out there at the audience, so please, anybody who's listening has questions on the development process, pop them in the chat. I will ask the guests your questions in real time. So go ahead and put those in there if we covered something that was confusing to you. My guess is we talked a lot about kind of the mechanics, the nuts and bolts about how these things happen. And Susan and I have spent a long time talking about the pipeline of standards development and how long these things take. So Cherylyn described one standard to you, ASCE 7, and the process of how that develops. It's a 6-year cycle. And it comes the 6 years prior to the 3-year code cycle that Susan is describing. So you take 6 years, stack it up with 3 years, and then you usually add on a year or two in adoption at the state level, and you're looking at a 10-year pipeline of code development. So things that we are just finishing up with right now in the 22 cycle that we'll be going into, hopefully, the 2024 IBC. We started on those in 2017, the end of 2016, as we wrapped up the last standard. So it is a very long process. We all can attest to that. And I think Cherylyn touched on this a little bit. Like you either have a passion for this or you'd rather watch paint dry. I have from people like, I can't believe you do the codes and standards. I can't believe you do that. I couldn't even pay attention that long. So it actually is a very unique individual who really enjoys this kind of work. So kudos to you both for, for putting yourselves out there as the code junkies that we all are. But they do change, and they do change. Even though 6 years plus 3 years, 10 years feels like a long time, we do get this question a lot of time from practitioners or other stakeholders that they really just change too quickly. And all of a sudden they're just learning the last standard edition of ASCE 7. They're just getting up to speed on the 2015 I codes, and then, oh my gosh, here comes another one. There are reasons why the code is every 3 years, and the standards, at least the ones that get adopted. We're really talking about, kind of building-centric, ICC-centric standards at the moment. We will get into other topics a little bit later, hopefully. But at the moment, it really does feel like a long process when you're in the slog. But to users, it can feel really fast. And why do they change so fast? We get this question an awful lot. Who would like to talk about your experience with the changes as you're either developing them, or why do you think they need to change every 3 years, or in our case, every 6 years with ASCE 7?
I can take the ASCE 7 question.
Yeah.
So what I usually tell people is it's all in the research. And if you think about earthquakes in the past 20 years, how much new fantastic research has come out. that can be incorporated into the standard and make buildings safer for people. And can give another example on the wind load side. So the maps are being updated. Everyone's always asking, why do the maps always change every single time? But we get new information and we have live input. So for example, Hurricane Michael that came through the Florida Panhandle area, being able to observe that damage and look at the hurricane modeling and being able to make updates based on what was actually seen in the field helps better inform these maps. And so it's really new information and it's best to get it out there for people, and it makes our designs better and more consistent and more reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just echo those sentiments, that's great, Cherylyn. You know, we learn from disasters and there's new information, and, you know, people want to have code provisions for new technologies and new systems like tall mass timber buildings. You know, that has been adopted by the state of California early. They couldn't wait until the 2022 code, but incorporated in the 2019 supplement. So it's important to have the resources available. Some states do choose to adopt every 6 years. So they would skip a code, not something that I would advise, but the option is there. However, for those jurisdictions that want to have provisions, let's say for the reuse of shipping containers or incorporation of new provisions because of the Berkeley balcony collapse, or like I mentioned, the tall wood, we want to have a book available for them. So the building code is a model code. It's a book in the bookstore, and it is to be adopted by a state, by a jurisdiction, and they can make changes to that model code to fit what's right for them given their local conditions.
We have really nice questions coming in on the chat right now about this. So I wanted to pitch this out there because I think it's really relevant to the cycle. And so we want to try to get new research and new materials and new systems into the document. But again, it takes a long time for them to get through. So Andre asks the nice question, what about alternative designs and methods? Can they be used as complementary part to the documents? I know you know the answer to that.
So yes, so in the provisions, they allow for performance-based design for seismic, and we're getting there for wind. So there are alternative methods that you can use, so long as there's a peer review, but there are other ways. It's not 100% prescriptive all the time.
Absolutely, and there are provisions in the building code that allow for alternate means and methods of construction, and the code official can review the submittal, may require a peer review to approve it, but the code does not want to prevent any new ideas or any new systems that meet the intent of the code from being used.
I'm going to follow up with you, Cherylyn. We had another question from Rick, specifically for you on performance-based. He says, how close are we to fully adopting the performance-based designs?
And that was wind specifically?
No, you touched a little bit on the seismic is already in there. Wind is
coming. So in last summer, we published the performance-based design for wind pre-standard. And so that gives you a whole bunch of information on how to design a building if you want to use performance-based design for wind. And so for the 728 cycle, we're going to be looking at how do we get that incorporated into ASCE 7? How do we add these provisions that allow more flexibility for designers to be able to use performance-based design? Because I think in many cases, a lot of folks are wanting to go more performance-based instead of the usual prescriptive standards.
Mm-hmm. And as they both mentioned, that is permitted through alternative. If it's not directly in the code or the standard rather, there is a place in chapter 1 in ASCE 7, and of course in the building code, there is provisions for that as well. Anything else on that topic? Because I'm going to kind of pivot us into a new topic. Did you have a final thought, Susan, before I go ahead? You're good. Okay, we have another question. Susan, this is for you. It says, it's from Rick. Why are the revision cycles different between codes and standards? It's like the IBC is always lagging behind the standard, taking a while to incorporate the new information from the standard. So that was a kind of a cycle question in the timing of what we were talking about earlier.
Right, right. Yeah, it's impossible for all of those hundreds of standards referenced in Chapter 35 of the International Building Code to match the I-code development cycle. But, like I said, we have a very dependable and identified code development cycle with the Group A codes and the Group B codes defined. So, there can be planning to align the most recent edition of the reference standard into the next building code. And we do what we can, meeting with the standard development organizations. But there's always going to be those situations where they don't line up exactly. And I know, Jennifer, you've had experience, working with ICC on just, making it happen at the very, I don't know if I should say last minute, but I think it comes right up to the deadline of when that code needs to be published. And, it's funny, I have it in my notes here that it's December 1st, 2023, that ASCE 722 needs to be available for reference in the 2024 IBC. So yeah, we definitely work together as much as we can to make it happen.
Yeah, actually, we will be done with 722 at the end of this calendar year. So we will submit our change proposals in January with a fully published ASCE 722,
nice.
because we're not going to do that again.
Okay, and see, this is excellent. Great, great. You're kind of raising the bar for standard development organizations.
Right. I don't know if anybody knows what she's referring to, but sometimes it can be, it's like a battleship. It's like trying to get a battleship to turn course, kind of at the last minute is super challenging, but we do it, we get there. Yeah, we have an awesome committee, great leadership on the ASCE 7 committee, very, very dedicated members on that committee. Great segue. Let's go ahead and talk about how does someone consider and/or join a standards development committee at SEI. Let's talk about within ASCE SEI, just so we can get that information out there to those who are listening. So Cherylyn, I'm going to give you this one.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So at the beginning of every cycle, there is a call for membership for ASCE 7, and it's sent out in email blasts. It's on ASCE SEI's website. And usually you'll hear talk about it among your colleagues if you know folks who are involved. And aside from ASCE 7, SEI has on their website a full list of all of their committees. And they're always looking for new members, especially young members. So if you are interested in becoming involved, all you need to do is reach out to the chair and discuss with them your interest in participating in the committee. And don't feel intimidated at all, because they definitely want your help. Everyone is always looking for more members and for more help. So anything that you can bring to the table would be really appreciated. And it's a great first step to getting involved if you've never been involved. I know it can seem somewhat intimidating to first get your feet wet, but just remember that everybody's been there before. Everyone had to get started that way. There's very few people who just are born with a network of structural engineers. Maybe their mom or dad was, but for the most part, we all have to start from somewhere. So reach out, make that first connection. If you're involved locally with ASCE or your SEI chapter, that's a great way to make connections too. Just put yourself out there and you will not regret it, I promise.
There is a program too that I wanted to talk about. Cherylyn touched on it, but SEI has a program specifically for young professionals to get a foot in the door, get comfortable with the standards experience, to really have an impact on the committee work. And I think Cherylyn would attest to that. program is called, really fancy name here, guys. It's called the Codes and Standards Young Professional Program. Really fancy. So if you are considering applying to join a standards committee, so A.SCE 7 or 41 for existing buildings or 24 for flood, we have 26 standards at F.SEI, so there's quite a variety of documents that you could work on given your interest or passion. Blast design, disproportionate collapse, we have very many standards, so we'd happy to guide you in the right direction. A lot of that is on our website. However, in the application process, we do have a checkbox for if you'd like to be considered for the Young Professional Program. And what that is we match up young professionals who are willing and eager to participate with a real role on the committee. As Cherylyn discussed, she was the secretary her first cycle, taking all the minutes at the meeting. We have since expanded a couple of different roles. There's a role called a balloteer, which is another young professional's job to organize and help assemble the ballot packages, which can be such a rich learning opportunity. It's, to be honest, I actually did it 2 cycles ago, and you learn every single code change or every single change that's going through in the standard and why, because every change proposal needs to have a reason statement. And so that document, that actual proposal form, stands on its own. It's actually the change that's being made and why the proponent wants to make the change. So the balloteer will assemble, if you will, all those proposals into the ballot packages, get them out to the subcommittee to vote on, and then ensure that they're responded to properly, and then also manage that whole process going to the main committee. So it is not a small job. It is a big job. And it is something that is so rich with learning opportunity. I would really encourage, if you're curious about it or have an interest, to check that out. And then the third job that we have created, the third role for young professionals, is called the historian. So we take, at the end of the balloting process, if you have a proposal that goes through the subcommittee, it passes, goes through the main committee and it passes, there may or may not be editorial changes or little tweaks to it, then it's considered a successful proposal, and it will go into the next edition of the document. Physically taking that change language and putting it into kind of the base document is another very important job to make sure we're not creating conflicts in the existing document. Do we have the pointers correct? These changes are coming kind of all simultaneously. So the job of the historian really is to marry up all of the proposals as they're making their way through for the particular chapter or subcommittee, the chapters that subcommittee has responsibility over. So for Cherylyn's, it was, chapter 26 through 31, with a new chapter this cycle, chapter 32 for tornadoes. So there are 3 different jobs that you'll see there in the application if you're interested in applying for a standards committee. Of course, you choose which standard you'd like to apply to, and then if you're interested in that program, maybe which role you're interested in. Anything else, Cherylyn, on that particular program that you'd like to share? I really like it. I think it does give a nice way in for a young professional who might be interested but not really understand how to get involved.
Yeah, I agree. That was a great explanation, Jennifer, really detailed. I would just say that it is a truly fantastic opportunity for a younger member to get involved, and you're not sitting in the back of the room, you're up front, you're with the subcommittee chair or the committee chair, working with them closely. You get to learn why things were changed in the past. Jennifer mentioned the historian position, and it may sound more like an editorial task, but really you're taking all of these changes in these chapters, and in some cases, some of them overlap. And so then it's trying to figure out, what change exactly is going to be made here, and sometimes going back to the chair and just making sure everything is sorted properly, and making sure everything's copied over for the next cycle appropriately, and just getting the network opportunity. I think it's a fantastic opportunity, and it brings up the next crew coming up behind those who are already involved. And that's extremely important because you have to be able to pass the torch at some point, and having those younger folks on board helps do that.
Susan, what's your experience at the code level with new folks joining? I mean, that is just a wide open arena.
Yeah, you know, I have a couple of questions about what was just discussed, because I had heard about it, you know, a little bit here and there, but not this kind of a presentation. So a couple of questions is, what is a younger member?
So ASCE defines younger member as 35 and younger. That's a great question.
Okay. All right. Well,
it's not hard and fast. I'll just say it's not hard and fast for our particular program at F.SEI, but we do try to keep the opportunities available. But
I'm like, isn't 40 the new 35 or whatever, however it goes? Yeah, because I am on the M.ASCE board of directors, so I'd love to share this information with the members. Yes, I would think that there would be a lot of people submitting their name for this. But with ICC, you know, we are also trying to attract the next generation of code professionals, code officials, and we have a number of programs to do that. We have a board shadow program, which is awesome. So at our annual conference, which is coming up next month, each of our board members has a younger member, and they follow them along throughout the week and learn so much, including all about the code development process. And we also have a Safety 2.0 program that is working on attracting the next generation. You were, Cherylyn, you were talking about the gray-haired individuals in the room. We call it the silver tsunami. And then through our chapters, we have over 350 ICC chapters in the US. And so through the chapter activities, we attract new folks to code development activities.
Jennifer, if I could add one more thing too about
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that ICC folks are doing the same thing. They're trying to get other folks involved. I think that's great. With the CSAD program, the great thing about it is that they are funded positions. I think for a lot of younger members, they might be intimidated to go and talk to their boss about, hey, I really want to be on this committee, but you know, you'd have to pay for my travel and whatnot. But these CSAD positions are fully funded, so your travel is reimbursed, your hotel. So really, it's just the time away from your job, and the meetings are usually just a couple of days of a work week, maybe 3 or 4 times a year, depending on where we are in the cycle. So that really helps bring in the younger folks because they are funded. And they don't have to worry about the double whammy of talking to their bosses about not only being away from the office, but hey, can you pay for this too? So it's a really great bonus.
It is. We've had so much success with it. I really hope that it can be as successful in the future as well. All right, I'm going to pivot us. We have 2 topics that are kind of bubbling in the chat. One is around international codes and standards, and the other one is kind of around non-building centric standards, so bridge standards or others that are out there. And I know, Cherylyn, you have a lot of experience with non-I codes. So I wanted to see if we could have a little discussion about that, your experience with something outside of the I codes, or I mean, I can answer the question too. Danny had a question about, are there any within F.SEI that are more bridge specific? And not at this time, Danny, we don't have bridge standards. Our colleagues at AASHTO pretty much cover the bridge standards. We do have a variety of different kinds of documents, but they are fairly building centric. But I'm going to pitch it over to Cherylyn because I know you have some thoughts on others that are not ASCE or iCode. Go ahead.
So in a previous life, I did do bridge design for about 8 years out in Phoenix. And so I was very familiar with the AASHTO provisions. And for those of you who aren't, you look at ASCE 7 and now it looks a little bit thicker, but the AASHTO feels like it's 10 times as thick. It's massive, but all of your information is in one location. You've got a steel chapter, concrete. You're not going over to say ACI 318 or the steel manual or anything like that. It's all in one place. So the most recent edition that I worked with was the 2012, but I didn't have a chance to really get into the development of that standard. But like ASCE 7, it's gone through many changes. It went from allowable stress and working stress to LRFD. So that was a big change in the bridge code world, or the bridge standard world. And then it's interesting because on the wind side, AASHTO actually references ASCE 7. And last I remember, I think AASHTO 2012 was referencing, I want to say the 795 edition of ASCE 7. So it's a little bit behind. So I'm not sure what's going on in the most recent edition of AASHTO, but it is interesting to kind of see the parallels between the two.
How frequently is AASHTO updated? Do you know, Cherylyn?
I think there was an 06 edition, then there was the 2012. I think it's roughly a 6-year cycle, a 5 or 6 year cycle. It's similar.
Okay. Any other standards or codes that you use in your practice?
Yes. So now being back in the buildings world, our company does primarily DoD work, military work, and so we are bound by the UFCs, the Unified Facilities Criteria, and it's essentially very similar to the IBC. Most of the IBC is adopted by the UFCs. However, there's a lot more in the way of requirements, as you can imagine, for military installations. Just a quick example, there's a risk category 5, which most people have never heard of. And until I started doing government work, I hadn't either. So the big difference there on the seismic side is, typically you're allowed to go into the inelastic range on design, but for risk category 5 structures, everything must remain elastic. So it's a new feature there that most of us aren't used to. And then blast considerations, things like that, standoff distances, things that you typically wouldn't need to consider in a typical school design or things of that nature.
Susan, I want to bring you back into the discussion, pivoting a little bit more based on the discussion in the chat to address international adoption. You are the International Code Council. While ASCE doesn't necessarily, we participate in the ISO standard development, which is more of a framework of provisions, not very specific. It's probably the rest of the countries outside of Eurocodes. Tell us a little bit about the international presence of the I-codes, and we have a specific question from Timothy. He's from Nigeria. How well do the code developers tailor the code provisions to meet the local conditions in these foreign countries?
Yeah, well, yes, thank you so much for the question. And we do have a global services branch of ICC, and we do have an office in Dubai, and we do encourage participation worldwide through our code development process. We have events such as the Global Connections Day. We have a membership council, global membership council that we would invite anybody who would like to join. You could just go to the ICC SAFE website and type in global membership council. And also I wanted to let you know about a tool that we have online where you can go to a map of the world and click on any location and find out what codes are being used if we have that information. And I did share that link for insertion in the YouTube video description or show notes. So I have that also here, but it is a little bit long. I think you'll be able to find that though if you search ICC Global Building Code Tool. So lots of resources. The International Building Code is used in many countries worldwide, so I would invite you to take a look at that map and click on it to find out exactly where. But we're always trying to incorporate other countries into the code development process and include provisions that would be applicable in all the countries if we're covering the United States with, let's say, maps, design maps. And so just wanted to let you know that and the resources available.
And I would add to that, thank you, Susan. I would add to that, while we're talking here today really specifically about ASCE, SEI standards and maybe the ICCI codes. There are many other standards development organizations. If you have a passion for concrete, for example, the ACI has standards development. They are very strong internationally as well. Of course, steel, all of the building materials, wood, masonry have their standards development programs specific to their material as well. So ASCE, SEI, we cover loads, we cover a lot of analysis type things. We actually have a full suite of standards being developed for the electrical transmission industry on the tower design, as well as a new standard on loading. So there's quite a bit of different standards developing organizations that cover pretty much every topic that's out there. So if you're like we have been saying all along, we really encourage you to get involved if this is of interest to you. If you're not finding something that kind of ignites you, or it's not something we do like bridge standards that Danny was asking about, there are other avenues. Our profession is healthiest when we're all involved in making these changes. After all, we use these documents to design our structures and keep them safe every day. So if you're interested in joining any of those, I'm sure they would all love to have you. We would love to have you. I'm just putting that out there because when I speak to students in particular, I like to definitely reinforce that there's so many opportunities for you to engage. It not only increases your technical expertise, but as Cherylyn was mentioning, it really builds your network. So find something that you're interested and passionate about, and then, the sky's the limit for you out there. Anything else on international before I have one more topic I want to get to from the chat? All right, we're going to dive into this one. It's kind of a big one. This is from Mark Levitan. At NIST, and he is asking about climate change. So I'm just going to read his full question. You girls think about it and I can answer too. But as our climate changes, this is having a huge impact on hazards that buildings experience: wind, rain, flood, snow, and others. It also impacts many other aspects of building design, including the HVAC system, electrical grid, etc. Can you explain what ASCE, SEI, and the ICC are doing to advance building codes and standards to address these huge and uncertain issues and changes regarding climate change? So I'll go first because we have you guys think about it. SEI has an effort through the Codes and Standards Activity Division Executive Committee to really look at the hazard. What is changing about the hazard? What do we know about the science? So for example, when I say hazard, I mean the wind that is included in ASCE 7, rain, snow, these hazards that Mark is discussing, flood. ASCE 7, as you know, relies on other data developers, or for snow or tsunami, we actually did the development ourselves to look at what is the hazard. And we historically or traditionally look at historic data and then build forward from that. Cherylyn mentioned that the tweaks that were made to the wind speed maps in 722 were impacted by, the hurricane season, particularly Hurricane Michael that hit the west coast of Florida, during that season. So we look at what has happened to set the hazard maps for kind of the next cycle. So in our effort here at SEI, we're trying to consider, do we know something? Where is the science around some of these hazards? Have the climate scientists look at them in a way that we as standard and code developers can leverage the knowledge to understand if these hazards are changing a certain way that's different from our historical perspective. And if that's true, is there something we should do about it within our standards that specifically address, an environmental hazard, let's say. So that's one effort that we're doing within F.SEI. And the result from that hopefully will be some knowledge gathered to present kind of a slate of options to our standards chairs to say, here's what we know right now about these hazards. And the reason we're doing that is because, as we mentioned earlier, the pipeline for developing standards into codes into adoption at the state level is about a 10-year process. So whatever we start doing now, if there's any influence that we can put into M.ASCE 728, that will go into the IBC 2030, maybe be adopted, a year or two after that, we're talking 10 years from today. So we're not going to know the answer today to get it into a document that we're using in 10 years. But it's probably time we start thinking about, if there's an impact, can we feel confident in understanding it? And then can we put anything into our codes and standards that we'll be able to leverage in 10 years? So those are kind of the big questions that we are looking at F.SEI. I'm going to pitch that back out to my colleagues, Cherylyn and Susan. Is there anything else that you guys want to add about the topic of addressing uncertain changes from climate change?
I'll just piggyback briefly on that, Jennifer. That was a fantastic explanation. I didn't even realize all of the efforts on F.SEI's side. I know that we've had discussions within ASCE 7 about climate change and what we could do, but currently there's nothing in the standard that considers climate change as it stands today. But it's at the forefront of everyone's minds. It's definitely a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes, this is an interesting question. I'm glad it was asked, but at the same time, I'm not prepared to answer it as best as I would like to be. I know that our global services is working on this issue and that there is a global resiliency dialogue initiative going on that's covered on our global services microsite that I referred to before. And one of the things that it says in an article that was written about the efforts of this global resiliency dialogue is that a workshop was held and there was a joint statement of findings and a commitment to collaborate on a joint initiative to inform the development of building codes that draw on both building science and climate science to improve the resilience of buildings and communities. So there are efforts going on. I think, it's something that is still in the future, but I'm be happy to share the resources through our global services microsite and invite everyone to follow along on those activities.
Thank you, Susan. Thanks, Cherylyn. So I have one more question that came up in the chat that I can answer. This is from Nurella. Where can I find ASCE 7, the 2022 edition, the publication? This is in its final process of going through response to public comment right now, and we intend to publish it in December. So in December, you can look on ASCE website. Hopefully you'll see it because we will be so excited. We'll be announcing it all over the place, but hopefully you'll see it. If you don't, please come back to the site and I'm sure you'll be able to find it. We're hopeful that we can make a big educational effort around the changes that are in that document as well. So stay tuned, look in your F.SEI update, join us if you're not a member of F.SEI, then you'll receive the updates, but just keep checking back in with us. It will be out in December. So with that, I can't believe it, we're already past a full 55 minutes. So as we wrap up, I just wanted to ask Susan and Cherylyn both for kind of your parting thoughts here on our fabulous topic of code development. Go ahead and leave our listening professionals who might be curious about code development, if there's anything that you would advise or like to offer, kind of as a parting thought or challenge to them regarding standard and code development, I welcome you to go ahead and speak to them directly.
Okay, I can go
Go
first.
ahead, sorry.
Sorry, Jennifer and Susan. So kind of what we've been discussing earlier is get involved. That is the best way to really become familiar with codes and standards. Ask questions, read the commentary, because there are a lot of great nuggets of information in the commentary that you may not see. And yeah, overall, just be curious, ask around, ask your colleagues. Don't be afraid to reach out. You can submit questions for code interpretations on F.SEI's website if you really can't find an answer. So there's lots of avenues to really get more involved on the codes and standards side. And just a quick little shout out, the gentleman who asked a question about climate change is the man behind the new Chapter 32 tornado load. So thanks for doing all that hard work, Mark.
Well said. Susan.
All right, great. Yes, I have 3 items that I'd like to part with, and it's all about getting involved. And I just want to say, with the Group B code changes coming up, the deadline being in January, we'll see Jennifer Goupil on screen, right, at those hearings, because we record them and post them since 2018, with the 2018 codes. All the testimony for all the code changes and the hearings are recorded and posted on our website. So number 1, wanted to invite you to visit our website, bookmark our website, iccsafe.org. On the front page slider, there's always great information. And if you scroll to the bottom, please join our social media channels. And number 2 is to subscribe to our Building Safety Journal, which comes out weekly and always includes information about code development. So you'll be able to follow along and get reminded of what's coming up. And you'll find that on our website on the top navigation bar, Journal. And number 3 is to add a reminder to your calendar to watch the public comment hearings, which take place September 21st through 26th. So anytime during the day, you just can pop on by going to our website and clicking on the live link to the hearings. And, even if you just hop on for 5 minutes, you'll get a flavor for what happens there, and you'll become more comfortable with the process. And I think you'll get hooked as well.
Yes, you'll definitely get hooked. It's way better than C-SPAN. It's very engaging. We all know what it looks like. It's just, you don't have to watch yourself on the massive screen they have there in the hall, but it's all very good. But it is, all kidding aside, that's how our code is developed in this country. So you can see the sausage getting made right there. It's actually very informative about how the process works. So with that, we're right at the bottom of the hour. I just wanted to give a few little reminders to the audience. We have our next F.SEI live session is on licensure, PE and SE exam. That's going to be on October 13th. We also have standard series that I've been running on the 6 new standards that have been developed and will be available this year or early next year. The next one is on ASC 59. That's the BLAST standard. That's going to be in September 15th at 1 o'clock Eastern. And then finally, I wanted to bring your attention to the electrical transmission industry has a virtual event called Powering Past the Pandemic. This is like many of us, their event was postponed due to COVID. So they're putting together a virtual mini event in advance of their full conference next year, but that's on November 3rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. All these are available on our website. You can register there. And lastly, but certainly not least, I want to thank again my guest, Susan Dowty from ICC and Cherylyn Henry from Zapata. This was an interesting conversation. I was pretty excited to have it. We have a lot of kudos here in the chat. I know you can't see them, but I think the people who attended also really enjoyed learning a little bit about this codes and standard development world that we all live in. So thank you very much for being game to join me on this session. I thought it was a good one. And thanks to my amazing F.SEI team behind the scenes for getting this all hooked up and working together. So with that, I'm going to wrap up today's session, and hopefully we'll see you again soon in the future. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.